Hello, I'm Dead Squirp, the lore master of the AD&DU, and this is the AD&DU Character Creation Workshop. In this workshop, I will obviously be going over character creation. Most of this information is geared towards brand new players who don't really know much of anything, but there can still be some valuable information for those who have played before and are just looking for some inspiration or some guidance. We will be going over in this character creation workshop first the legal content. There are many source books within D&D, and the legal content just goes over which source books are actually allowed to be used. Then we will be going over what things to think about when you're building a character, if you're trying to figure out what you're going to play. And then after, we'll be going over some examples for inspiration of characters. We'll talk about D&D Beyond after that and partially how to use it. And then we'll have some resources, but those resources are all listed in the D&D resources. So, the following source books are allowed for character creation. And those are the Player's Handbook, Volo's Guide to Monsters, Xanthar's Guide to Everything, Mordekainen's Tome of Foes, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, and the Elemental Evil Player's Companion. Variant races are also allowed. You'll see some races, you'll hit see human and then variant human, or ASMR and variant ASMR. Just means that the ones that say variant, which are just slightly tweaked versions of the other race, are allowed to be played. The Bloodhunter class is the only critical role content that's allowed. The Death Domain and Oathbreaker subclasses for the Cleric and Paladin, respectively, are also allowed. But they generally are more morally gray and tend to lean more towards the evil side of things. So try to rein yourself in that regard, as if DMs do not want to have an evil player in their game, they are allowed to reject you. So we'll be going over all of the classes real quick. I'll give you some of the pros, cons, tell you what they're about quickly. And if you can hang on to one of those that you really like that you hear, and use that for your character. So Tisifer is meant to be like a magical engineer. They can infuse magical items, they can infuse items with magical properties, or even craft some magical items. They're very highly customizable and can be effective in a lot of roles. But the cons to them is you have a pretty limited number of items you can infuse with magic, as well as you need to have a bit of a good understanding of all of the options that Artificers are given to utilize them efficiently. And underneath, you'll see the subclasses Alchemist, Armorer, Artillerist, and Battlesmith. Subclasses are something that are chosen when you reach a certain level. That level changes based on what class you are, and that subclass will modify your class slightly. One of the ones that really stands out in Artificer, stands out as in it's one of my personal favorites, I think it's one of the more interesting ones, but they're all good, is probably the Armorer. As you can just, you get to walk around with this cool suit of armor that's either this big, hulking, strong one, or this sleek, sneaky one. Then you have Barbarian. Barbarians are, big, strong guys who rage into battle and deal a lot of damage without taking much. They have the highest possible HP in the game. They can dish out and take quite a lot of damage. And they have a reckless attack feature that makes it so their attacks are very unlikely to miss. That being said, they generally have a pretty low armor class. They have very few features that help when you're not in combat, and overall they're just a pretty simple class to play. Bards are characters who use art to cast magic and to use magic. That art can take many forms, whether it's painting or acting, or the most common art form that bards tend to take, music. They have bardic inspiration that gives all of their allies additional dice to roll that helps them succeed on any checks they make. They have a couple features, Jack of all trades and expertise, which makes all of their skill proficiencies really good, which we'll go into what skills actually are later. And they have many spell options that tend to take the form of a support role to help out all of their allies. And that's also a con in a way, where it lends itself to a support playstyle. On their own in combat, they aren't typically super strong, but there's definitely some subclasses that make it not that way, such as Swords and Valor, that make them better at melee combat. As for damage-oriented spells, their selection in that regard is also very limited, and a lot of their features are roleplay based, so you need to be actively engaging with NPCs in the world outside of combat to make full use of a bard. Then you have Bloodhunter. Bloodhunter is a class that's all about blood magic. They do not get magic in the same way as other classes, where they have specific spells that they can cast. Instead, they get some things, one of which is called their Crimson Right, where they deal some damage to themselves, and then their weapon will get an elemental effect, so they can deal damage to themselves, and their sword would ignite into flame. They also have a feature called Blood Maledict, where they can use blood curses to affect opponents, so they can deal some damage to themselves to do things such as make an enemy take damage if they do more than one attack on a turn, make an enemy temporarily blind, etc. Big con to them is, well, for a class that's supposed to deal damage to themselves to deal extra damage to the others, they tend to have pretty low HP, much lower than you would want from a class of this style. That's like their big con. They don't have many other cons than that, to be honest, which is why they're still a good class, but that one con of the low HP really nerfs them. Next up, we have Clerics. Clerics are spellcasters who get their abilities from worshipping and devoting themselves to a god. They have a very flexible spell list that allows them to not only heal and support allies, but also deal good damage to enemies. They prepare spells for each day, which basically means that they can change what spells they know every day. Cons are, some groups will expect a cleric to focus on healing, which, if that's not what you built your cleric for, they can be very disappointed in that. And clerics have an extremely high reliance on spells. Once they've used up all their spells for the day, they take a serious dip in their power and ability. They very much have to end up, taking a backseat while the rest of the party continues adventuring. Then we have Druid. Druid is like a nature spellcaster, and their biggest feature, their most well-known feature beyond their spellcasting, is their ability to use their wild shape to transform into animals. Between their spellcasting and their wild shape, they have tools to handle most situations. They can swap their spells in and out at the start of each day, much like clerics do. Their wild shape feature gets stronger as they level up, so they generally can keep pace, and specifically if you choose Circle of the Moon, then your wild shape will become very strong as you level up. The cons, though, is Druid isn't a very beginner-friendly class. Between having to keep track of a bunch of spells and having to keep track of a bunch of stat sheets for your wild shape, it can be overwhelming to beginners. And once you reach mid-levels, unless you specialize in Circle of the Moon, Polymorph is pretty much, the spell Polymorph is just as effective as the Druid's wild shape. Fighter is the most simple class there is. It's easy to pick up, and they're very effective. It's, just a person who is trained with weapons and armor. Your common soldier. That's the general idea for the class. They're proficient in every kind of armor and shields. They're proficient in every kind of weapon. They have the most ability score improvements of any class. So if you're a fighter, your abilities can get higher than everyone else's. And they have an ability where you just get an extra action on your turn. So you can just do more things. If you use that ability, you can do more things on your turn. Similar to the Barbarian's cons, though, their outside of combat ability is pretty low, and they're just as I said, they're a very simple class. If you end up getting bored of the fighter or you want to be able to do something more than what the fighter can do, you're just kind of out of luck. Then you have the Monk. The Monk is all about hand-to-hand combat, fighting. Martial arts is the general idea behind Monk. They can attack a lot of times and roll a lot of dice on their turn. Their key points give you a lot of offensive, defensive, mobility, and utility options. And the Monk's best ability scores, Dexterity and Wisdom, are some of the most common saving throws you'll face, which basically that translates into the things Monks usually want to be good at are some of the best defensive abilities you can get. On the other side, their attacks, although they get a lot of them, each one of them does low damage. They also have pretty low health for being a melee class, and they can be dependent on a lot of ability scores to be very effective, which generally you won't necessarily get enough. You don't have as many points to spend amongst your ability scores as you would like for a monk. Then, Paladin. They are holy warriors, holy avengers. Similar to a cleric, they get power from worshipping a god, but unlike a cleric where that power comes through magic and spells, a paladin's ability comes through more physical and melee combat. They are proficient in, and can use all types of armor, shields, simple and martial weapons, much like the fighter. Their Divine Smite ability allows you to add a bunch of damage if you hit. And even with their martial and melee focus, they do have a small list of some spells they can still cast. The cons with them is that their Divine Smite that does a bunch of extra damage can only be used on melee attacks, and using it will burn through the spells you get. They can, like Monk, they're pretty reliant on multiple ability scores to be very effective. And when you choose your Oath, which is the Paladin subclass, it can kind of lock you in a certain role-playing mindset, and if you break that role-playing mindset or you go against what your Oath says you should do, you can end up being an Oath breaker and losing the abilities you wanted to have. Then we have Ranger. You'll see a lot of people, diss the Ranger and, talk about how bad it is, myself included. But the truth is, Ranger isn't that bad, especially after the sourcebook Tasha's Cauldron of Everything added some new features to the Ranger to make them better. They're pretty good now. They are a martial-focused class, a melee-focused class that tends to lean towards the nature things. They're your trackers. They have a specialty of a certain, environment. They know their homelands like the back of their hand, and they have enemies that they're really good at fighting. They have good traits and skills for exploration. They have some spells for martial class, much like the Paladin. They're a martial class with some spell casting. Some of the cons is their spell list is more support-based, which you wouldn't necessarily expect from a martial caster. And some of their class features as they level up are pretty weak or almost entirely useless if the environment you're in doesn't lend itself to those abilities. Rogue is sneaky stabby. They're all about stealth and creeping up behind people and stabbing them in the back. Their sneak attack ability lets them deal high damage to an enemy if the enemy is unaware of them or if they have an ally that is flanking the enemy with them. Their cunning action ability lets them move faster than everyone else or slip past enemies without the enemies being able to stop them. And even lets them hide and attack on the same turn. In addition, they get a lot of proficiencies, which can make their just about any skill or any check they try to do, they'll have a really good chance at succeeding it. Some cons are the rogue is a martial class, it's a melee class, but despite that, they only ever get one attack per turn, unlike most other martial classes. If they want to do high damage, then they're pretty much 100% reliant on sneak attack. And if your party tends to go in guns blazing, then the rogue whose specialty is stealth kind of falls off. Sorcerer is one of the big spellcasters of the game. They have a lot of spells they can potentially learn, and a lot of those are high damaging spells. They have a meta magic, which allows them to modify and alter their spells to do certain things. For example, they can get a careful spell meta magic, which allows them, if they have an AoE spell, then they can choose certain allies that don't get affected by it or get affected by it less. They have a thing called sorcery points that they can use to regain spell slots so they can cast more spells in a day. And sorcerers are charisma based, so they tend to be really good at role playing and talking and convincing and deceiving. Cons are they have a very limited number of spells that they actually get to know. While the list of what they can learn is big, the amount they actually get to choose from that list is small. They have the lowest potential HP. They're tied for the lowest with wizards. And and they tend to get because they have such a low quantity of spells they can actually choose, they tend to become very specialized and not very versatile. Then we have Warlock. Warlocks are kind of spellcasters. They're the most unique spellcasters, where they can only cast 2 spells a day, but unlike other classes, they can get those spells back on a short rest rather than a long rest, which is basically 1 hour break is a short rest and 8 hours sleep is what a long rest is. But overall, the concept for a Warlock is they give up part of themselves or make a deal of some kind with a greater being who then gives them power. Eldritch Blast is a cantrip Warlocks can get, and it is arguably the best cantrip in the game. Only Warlocks can choose it. And they have a feature called Eldritch Invocations that allow them to get some really powerful and permanent buffs to their character overall. Some of their cons is because they can only cast 2 spells a day, it's very hard to... You have to really think about when you're going to use them, and you can tend to either find yourself using them up too quickly and wishing you had saved, or not using them at all and wishing you had used them. In addition, sometimes being linked to an otherworldly patron can make some roleplay things pop up that might hinder your character or, be a problem to your party overall. Then, wizards. Wizards are your classic, I cast a spell. The difference between them and sorcerers is sorcerers' magic is inherent. They are born with the ability to cast spells, while wizards get the ability to cast spells with years upon years of studying. Wizards have the largest selection of spells to choose from. They can learn spells. If they find scrolls out in the world, they can transcribe those spells into their spell book and learn and have a even longer list. And they're incredibly flexible. They can trade out their spells much like the druids and clerics do at the start of the day to learn and just cast whatever they're going to need for that day and have whatever they're going to need prepared for that day. In early levels of play, wizards can be very limited in what they can do. Along with sorcerer, they have the lowest HP. For new players, seeing the amount of spells you can learn and prepare, it becomes it's choice paralysis. You just have so many options, you're not sure what to choose. And learning new spells for a wizard can be expensive, as if they're learning spells from scrolls, it costs them time and money. So that was all of the classes. These here are the races. I'm not going to go through each and every one of them. You can find in the player doc some information on each of player lore doc, some information on each and every one of these races that will give you more of an insight. But you can pause and just quickly look through these real quick descriptions. So the backgrounds are what your character was before they were an adventurer, pretty much. Whether they were an acolyte where they studied at a church, whether they were a charlatan and, con people on the street, etc., all the way through. On D&D Beyond, whenever you select one of these backgrounds, you'll be able to read up a little bit more on them, find out what they are and what they do. But these right here are the backgrounds that are allowed to be played. Any other backgrounds you see in the list on D&D Beyond, know that you cannot play them unless they're listed right here. So, the next thing to talk about, how do you choose what to play? There's two ways of thinking about this. And those two ways are either you think about the heart of your character first, or you think about the mechanics of your character first. Now, what do each of those mean? Well, you could start with the heart and then go to mechanics, start with mechanics, then go to the heart. But heart basically boils down to having a concept for who your character is rather than what they do first. Right here are 3 characters I have either played or one of my players has done, and these are all examples of heart first characters. The one on the left is Aunt Deneen. The player wanted to do a sweet old lady who is kind of like a motherly figure to the party. And after he came up with that concept, he figured out who Deneen was, and then he asked himself, okay, now what class should I choose? What exactly does she do in combat? And he eventually settled on, based on some background decisions he had made for her, she'd best fit as a sorcerer. The next one is a character named Varial. For Varial, the concept was her husband had died, and in an attempt to bring him back, she had made a deal with the devil. The devil created twisted her words, and the contract turned her from a human into a tiefling. In addition, when her husband came back, it was a zombified version of him and not the real him. She had that whole concept and then decided, well, I suppose if I have some devilish influence in me now, if I went from a human to a tiefling, a sorcerer would make the most sense. Finally, the one on the right is a grung named Crom. The idea for this character was he was raised in a forest that was somewhere between the material plane and the Feywild, and a tree ant was dying because the entire forest had grown sick. So what they did is they imported the tree ant's soul into Crom's body. So now Crom was sharing a body with a tree ant. After a while, with that concept, he tried to figure out the mechanics of it and figured eventually he would just be a druid, where his magical powers come from the soul of an ant that's inside him. Then there's mechanics first characters. These are characters who you take an idea for a mechanical idea. I want to be this character. I want to be a warlock. I want to be, whatever. And then you build a character around that simple idea. So first on the left, we have a kobold named Kib. He is a warlock, and the story behind him, well, I guess first I should say, I wanted to make a warlock. I wanted my character to be a warlock, and I wanted it to be the genie subclass. So a genie gave me my powers. I also had really wanted to play a kobold, so I just kind of stuck those two together, and then I started working out who Kib actually would be. And eventually I settled on Kib just discovered a rock sitting in uh, a cave, and he decided the rock was his new best friend, but he came to discover that there was a genie trapped in the rock. Ultimately, Kib thinks, though, he's just crazy and is hearing voices, but is fine with hearing voices and fine with being crazy. The next one is Martha. I wanted to play a druid, but I really liked the idea of a druid who wasn't human. So I tweaked the animal shape and looked at it and thought, well, what if my druid is a dog who can use wild shape to turn into a human? And with that mechanic, Martha was born. Next was Yaprir. He came around purely because I was reading on the fighter subclasses, and I read Rune Knight. And what one of Rune Knight features was that you could use your action to go from being to increase your size to to a large creature. Then when I was reading what fairies can do, I read that they can cast enlarge person on themselves. With those two ideas together, I figured that fairy, which is a small creature, could fly into the middle of a bunch of enemies, use the Rune Knight ability to become a large creature, and then use enlarge person to become a huge creature. And you go from this, tiny 3-foot tall fairy to this 20-foot tall monstrosity. And that was the mechanic of that character. So with that said, the next step would be to create a D&D Beyond account. You can, if you follow one of those links that I had put in D&D resources to join the campaign, you'll start with the landing page via link, which will tell you to sign in, and you can create an account there. Or if you just go to dndbeyond.com, you'll see the home page, and you'll see a button in the upper right corner that just says sign up. You'll click on that and make an account. Once you have an account, and you've clicked on one of the links, you should see a screen that looks like this. Join a campaign. It'll say AD&DU. It probably won't say 1 because that one's already filled, but you'll see some sort of number there. Then you'll have the two options to create a character, or you'll see a list of the characters you've already created. You either click on create a character or add one of your characters to the campaign, and then you'll make a character. Or your character's already made, and this is the end of the journey. So when you're creating a character, this will be the first thing you'll see. At the top, you'll have a navigation bar. Starts with home, then you select your race, your class, your ability scores, your description, equipment, and then your character sheet will be made. At the top, name of your character will go into the character name box. The blue arrows take you to the next section. The character preferences, these are the settings you should have. All of the sources should be turned off. The only partner content on should be Critical Role. You should have both of the optional features options on. Your advancement type, you should click on it and select XP. And your hit point type should be fixed. Then you'll go into the race selection class. Once again, you can look through all of the races in the lore doc to figure out which one fits best or speaks to you best, but if you're doing more of a mechanics first approach, you can click on each of these races within D&D Beyond, and it will tell you about all about what they do. As you'll be able to see on the confirmed race, that's the High Elf one. High Elves have dark vision, High Elves have keen senses, they have a Fey ancestry, they have a trance, and underneath each of which is listed what they do. On the left, you'll see that list of the Arakakra, Dragonborn, Dwarf, Elf, etc. That is the base rules list of races you could choose. If there is a race you would like to select but you haven't purchased it on D&D Beyond, then make sure you watch the how to homebrew video. So whenever you select a race, and you'll also see a similar thing when you select your class, some of them will have an exclamation point and be highlighted in blue. That means you have to make an additional decision. So for High Elves here, they get to choose any one cantrip of their choice from the spell list. So underneath they'll have a choose a spell, they'll click on that, and you'll see a pop-up list of all the spell cantrips in particular you'll be able to choose from. So when you choose your race, make sure you fill out all of those, highlighted blue sections. Then you'll have to choose your class. You'll have the lists of all the classes here. If you're interested in Artificer, but you haven't purchased it on D&D Beyond, it will not pop up on this list. And in that case, if you DM me, DeadSquirp, directly, I will help you do a workaround for it so you can still play the Artificer without having to purchase it. But once you click on a class, you'll see over on the right, there'll be a list similar to the races of the things that the class can do. At the bottom, you'll need to press Add Class when you've selected it, and then you'll see a different screen like this one that is easier to read. It's more direct in what it does. Class features will be all the primary features. You'll be able to choose your proficiencies, which proficiencies for the clerics that they get to choose from are history, insight, medicine, persuasion, and religion. So it's just things that the proficiencies are just skills like those that you're better at. Then you'll see there's a divine domain that you get to choose an option for cleric. That is the cleric's subclass. Clerics choose their subclass at first level, as well as sorcerers and warlocks. Then druids and druids and wizards choose their subclass at level 2, and every other class chooses it at level 3. So, when you get to the abilities page, you will have a drop-down list that says choose generation method. You have to make sure you choose either point buy or standard array for it. What point buy does is it gives you a number of points you can allocate to each of your stats, which are strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. Standard array will give you a list of numbers: 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, and 8 is what I believe the numbers are. I might be off though. So the total, as you can see on the dexterity, the number that they put in their dexterity was 15. The modifier, which is the actual number you'll add to any dice rolls that involve your dexterity, is +2. So the reason the base score is 13 is they put 13 points into their dexterity, but because of their racial bonus, they chose a race that gives them a +2 to their dexterity. The total is 15 instead. All the other stuff you can ignore, they're not relevant at the moment. Quickly, I will go over each of the ability scores and say what they all do. Strength is a measure of your raw strength. It will modify your athletics skill, as well as any strength-based weapons, such as like a battle axe or a great sword. It'll increase the damage the higher your strength is. Dexterity is your precision, your nimbleness. It is used in multiple skills such as stealth, acrobatics, sleight of hand. It will increase your armor class depending on what armor you're wearing, and it will increase the damage for dexterity-based weapons, which are light weapons such as daggers, rapiers, short swords, scimitars, things like that. Constitution is a measure of your fortitude. The higher your constitution, the higher your HP will be. In addition, poisoning effects or certain spells will have you make a constitution saving throw, so the higher your constitution, the better you'll be able to resist it. Intelligence is used for a lot of skills such as arcana or history or religion. The higher your intelligence, the better at most skills you'll be, to be honest. In addition, if you are a wizard or an artificer, the higher your intelligence, the more powerful your spells are. Wisdom is the most common used ability score for resisting spells. The higher your wisdom, the better you will be at resisting most spells. It's also used for skills such as insight and perception. And if you are a druid, a cleric, I think those are the two. There is probably one more class I'm forgetting, but your spells will be stronger the higher your wisdom. Finally, your charisma is how charming you are. It's how silver your tongue is. Skills like persuasion and deception use your charisma. In addition, for classes like warlock and sorcerer, the higher your charisma, the better or the more powerful your spells will be. So on your class page, you'll be able to click on the spells to go into your spell management. You'll first be on prepared spells, or so you need to go down to the known spells, or it'll also be called add spells for certain classes. Down there, you will find at the top, you'll see cantrips. This one says 0 out of 3, and prepared spells 0 out of 1. The difference between cantrips and prepared spells, and you'll be able to see under spells like guidance, it says cantrip, light, it says cantrip, while if you go further down under bane, it says first level. So any spell that doesn't say cantrip is a prepared spell. For prepared spells, you have a limited number of spell slots. Usually at first level, you have 2 spell slots to start. Whenever you cast a non-cantrip spell, you have to take up one of those spell slots. If you have no spell slots left, you can cast no more spells for that day. Cantrips, on the other hand, do not take spell slots. You can cast them as many times as you please for the day. So there's 2 general ways I find people like to choose spells. They either click and open up and read a description about every single spell, find out what it does in its entirety, or they'll just read it and say, Sacred Flame sounds interesting, I'll prepare that one. There is no wrong way, but through playing, you will eventually find what spells you do and don't like. That is the character creation workshop. If you have any more questions, ask a DM, ask a lore keeper, ask a mod. Good luck, have fun playing, and we're glad to have you in the AD&DU.